Okay, it's Sunday, which means against my better judgment, it's time to go to Reddit, see what we can find in this hive of scum and villainy. So I've been to the Overwatch University subreddit ahead of time and just scraped all the questions off the first couple pages, and we're going to answer the questions now. And we're back to playing Dragon Ball FighterZ in the background, because I've actually been playing the game again. They showed the new characters. It's true, they finally, after like 12,000 years, have said the new one's coming out in a week. Finally. Anyway, if you're wondering which side I'm on, just look for whichever side started with Android 21. So the first question is, what is the difference between the terms making space, taking space, and maintaining space? So there was a little bit more in the thread that was also like, how do the tanks do these things as well? So making space is just the act of making an area of the map safe for your teammates. So example, if I'm playing Reinhardt, I make space for my team by simply standing between my team and the enemy team and holding my shield up, right? I'm stood in the choke point holding my shield up, Soldier stood behind me, Soldier is now in a safe space because I'm holding my shield up. I have made the space that is safe. Taking space is the act of just physically walking in and taking it from the enemy team. So Reinhardt takes space by walking at the enemy team and swinging his hammer pretty much. Like just physically marching at them. And then maintaining space is not really something that the main tanks typically do. The maintaining of space is usually more the off-tanks area, but you're maintaining the space. You have already taken control of the area, and you are now taking steps to make sure the enemy team doesn't take that space back from you. And the reason I say this is more the off-tank's responsibility is Reinhardt is largely doing the same thing as he did in the making space category, right? He's standing between his team and the enemy team. But Reinhardt can only be facing one direction, right? He can only really be worrying about one thing, and that's the front line. Maintaining space also takes into account dealing with things like flankers and divers, which Reinhardt can't really deal with. That's usually the off-tank's area, like the Zarya, the Roadhog, the Diva. They are usually the ones that are in control of maintaining space, because they're the ones that are going and, like, peeling for their backline and, like, killing the flankers, zoning people off. Reinhardt is still doing, by and large, the same thing, standing between his team and the enemy team. Orisa does more or less the exact same thing. Her taking space is done in more of a leapfrogging style because her shield is based on cooldowns rather than being freely movable like Reinhardt's. So she has to do a more leapfrogging slowly forward from cover to cover and taking space like that. Though by and large doing the same thing, just in a more staggered fashion rather than Reinhardt just going in a straight line right at you. And then Winston and Hammond are a little bit more weird in that they don't make space by blocking for their teammates. They make space by jumping on the bad man's backline, and then them doing that is forcing their team to pay attention to the divers rather than their own team. So that's how... And that's, like, making space and taking space for the dive tanks are basically the same thing, because their making space is by bullying the enemy team's backline, because that's making their team, the enemy team, turn and face you. And taking space is them jumping on the backline to do that. So it's kind of the same thing. And then maintaining space for them is largely still the same thing, just jumping on the bad mans, more or less, and bullying their backline still. It's, maintaining space is typically something the defending team does more than the attacking team, and you tend to not see dive comps on the defending team so much. It does happen, certainly, but usually dive tanks are not so preoccupied with the maintaining space aspect of the game, because it kind of all looks the same from a perspective of a dive tank. You're jumping on the opposite team's backline and bullying them, thereby forcing a response from the enemy team. Is pretty much how it goes. So that's what those terms mean, and that's roughly how the tanks all go about doing it. Anyway, next up is, what are people's thoughts on the Rhine buff? And my thoughts on the Rhine buff are more or less completely inconsequential. Because the knockback resistance is nice and all, but let me tell you what it actually makes a difference to. Getting booped by Lucio. That's the only thing it realistically affects to any real degree. Because, here's the thing, the main source of knockback that's going to kill you as Reinhardt is Hammond. And if you are going to give Reinhardt knockback resistance to counter Hammond, the knockback resistance needs to be like fucking 70% for it to be realistic in terms of saving you from Hammond. Because Hammond knocks you so fucking far, dude, that 30% is not gonna be good enough. Was it 30%? It's somewhere in the region of 30%. It definitely wasn't more than 50. 30 or 40, I'm pretty sure. Either way, not enough. Like, have you seen how far Hammond knocks you? It's not good enough. It needs to be legitimately close to 100% to realistically save you from Hammond as Reinhardt. Like, the other things that are gonna knock you back from, like, you got, I guess, Doomfist. That's cool. Doomfist's not really going for you most of the time, though, as Reinhardt. He's bullying the soft people on your team instead. It'll stop you from getting bullied by Lucio, like he can't push you as far. Cool, right? Usually also not the thing you're typically worrying about as Reinhardt, but, you know, whatever. Nice, I guess. Doesn't help you with Orisa, flatly, because that's not a knockback on Halt. And that's kind of it. I guess it makes it a little bit harder to get bullied by Whole Hog, but, like, great. Fantastic. Definitely, like, quality buff right there for Reinhardt, right? So, no, I think, by and large, the Reinhardt buffs are more or less completely inconsequential. They will save you from, like, 1% of occurrences. The main issue is Hammond, and it's not a high enough percentage to save you from Hammond. Hammond knocks you way too far. So, next up is thoughts on the current state of Soldier. So, as far as design goes, I think Soldier does exactly what Soldier is supposed to do, which is be a very consistent source of damage from mid to long range. He does exactly that. The thing is that, like, I've always thought Soldier's been basically fine. It's just he's not as good as McCree, or, like, Widow, either. Or Ashe, and the reason just is, like, Soldier's got a lot less, like, dramatic impact in terms of kit, right? Like, McCree, Ashe, Widow, they have the possibility to kill multiple people back-to-back without any abilities being used, really, right? Soldier doesn't have that. Like, he can't just suddenly pop, like, 3 people in a row. His ultimate is debatably better than, Deadeye and Infrasight, but it is, like, not better than Bob. And is only debatably better than, like, Deadeye. And he has less utility in terms of overall kit. He doesn't have hard crowd control, basically, what that one means. Widow also doesn't really have utility, but she trades on not having utility by just doing a lot more damage, so it evens out in that regard instead. But Soldier does, like, what he's meant to do, right? Like, he's decent at breaking barriers. McCree's better now, but, you know, Soldier's better at breaking barriers, but Soldier's just an overall, like, continuous threat in a fairly wide area. Like, McCree has a fairly specific zone that he's effective in. Soldier has a much wider field that he's effective in compared to McCree. And he is still a very consistent source of damage. Like, Reinhardt's generally gonna bully tanks around a little bit more than McCree is, unless McCree's in a position where he can flashbang, fan, roll, fan, right? Like, then McCree's gonna bully them around in the same way that, like, a fucking Reaper would, right? But outside of that, Soldier's still gonna kind of be better overall. Soldier also gets to have more leeway in terms of mechanical skill, because he's got an automatic weapon with a lot of bullets, so he isn't quite as pinpoint precise as the other hit scan heroes are, so he's a little bit easier to play. And he's got the... He's, like, pretty good at dueling people. He's not as good at McCree because very little competes with just stunning the person and then killing them before they can respond, but Soldier's got Biotic Field, and he's got micro-missiles to... Not micro-missiles, Helix Rockets. Micro-missiles is Diva. He's got the Helix Rockets to finish people off, and he is, like, pretty fucking tanky when he's in the Biotic Field, meaning he can fight off most divers relatively easily, as well as flankers, so... He has the benefit of being very independent. It's easier to control high ground on Soldier because of the independence Biotic Field gives him and his wider field of view. Like, if somebody like Winston or Diva jumps on McCree, if they block the flashbang, McCree's kind of spent in terms of, like, fighting the person off. Soldier can just put the Biotic Field down, stand toe-to-toe, and fight you. Which is, a much more consistent effect, you know? But the thing is that Soldier just doesn't have the kind of dramatic payoff that, McCree and Ashen Widow do, which means he just doesn't feel like he's as impactful overall, or he doesn't feel like he's as impactful overall outside of his generally consistent damage and threat, which leads to people concluding, well, he must just be bad. And he's not really. Like, he's not bad. He's just not as good as the other options. I do actually think, though, in, like, low SRs, like Bronze, Silver, and lower Gold, Soldier ends up being better than the other alternatives, unless you are an extremely skilled player mechanically. Because Soldier, Biotic Field just gives him tremendous independence. He requires little support from his teammates. He can pretty much just be off by himself fighting the Badmans, and it's no big deal. Whereas McCree, Ash, Widow, to some degree, they require their teammates to, at the bare minimum, heal them. Whereas Soldier doesn't require that, and they also prefer if, like, the team is making some space for them as well. Soldier is long range, can heal himself, so he doesn't have to worry about getting as much support as the other characters do, meaning he's very good in low SRs where you can't rely on any kind of assistance coming to you. Yeah, so, like, overall, like, Soldier does what he's meant to do. He's just not as flashy as the alternatives, and he's not as rewarding as the other ones are for very high skill, but he's not bad. Like, I still prefer Soldier to McCree overall in terms of gameplay. Like, I just like Soldier more. Is he as good as the others? No, but he's not unplayable. Like, if you like Soldier, fucking play Soldier, dude. Like, especially, like, it really doesn't matter outside of extremely high SRs, to be honest with you. You can do, like, whatever the fuck. So, there you go for that one. Next up is, after I... there we go. Okay. Writing numbers down is hard. So, this one is a very straightforward question. Does doing damage to Orissa's barrier after she dies help farm my ult charge? No, because damaging barriers of any kind does not give you ult charge. Reinhardt's shield, Photon barrier, Orissa's barrier, Hammond's adaptive barrier, adaptive shields. His personal shields don't give ult charge. Like, no barriers give ult charge. Zarya's bubbles, they don't give ult charge. Shields that are part of the character's health bar give shields, so like Zarya's 200 shields, Symmetra's 100 shields, Zen's 150 shields. Those give you ult charge because they're the character's health more than they are a barrier. But flat-out barriers like Orisa and Reinhardt, nope, no such luxury. They do not give you any kind of ult charge. So there you go. Next up is... how do you deal with getting blamed when you are playing well? So, this is, you know, pretty much this happens to Widowmaker players, and few other people, mostly like the hitscan DPS, the snipers, we're really saying. If you're a really bad McCree, you are less likely to get called out on it than if you are like a Widow. Even if you're like a moderately good Widow, right? You are way more likely to get called out on that than being a bad McCree. People just have like a different expectation of you, I guess. Anyway. So, here's the thing, is that, like, if your team are blaming you, and you're doing well, there's nothing you're going to be able to do to convince them that you're doing well, is there? Because they've already decided that you're not doing well, but you are, right? So, there's nothing you can do to convince them. Like, it's best pretty much just to not engage with them, because it doesn't matter how convincing of an argument you propose to them, they're just going to be like, I'm not seeing you in that kill feed enough, champ. Right? Like, that's it. They've already made their decision about your skill. There's nothing you can do to change it. So it's best to just not engage with it. And here's the thing. Like, I've said this about Widowmakers before. Like, if you're playing Widow, like, don't worry about what your teammates are saying. Because if you are doing well, the enemy team knows what you did. They are the ones that can feel the pressure you are applying by being a threat on Widowmaker. And more often than not, like, what usually happens in these situations is your team will start shit-talking you in the all chat sooner or later, and the enemy team, assuming you have been playing well, will usually say something to the effect of, Widow's fucking carrying you, shut the fuck up, you nerds, right? That is what often happens in these situations. It's best just to not engage with them. They've already made their decision about your skill. There's nothing you can do to convince them otherwise. But the other team, they sure as shit know what you do and did, and you sure as shit know what you did. That's all that really matters. You're never gonna see the people you just played with ever again, unless you're in extremely high or extremely low SRs. You'll never see them again. And even then, you'll only see them a couple times, dude. Like, don't worry about it. For all intents and purposes, they cease to exist as soon as this, like, 15-20 minute game ends, and then it's over. You know what you did, and the enemy team knows what you did, and that's the important thing. So, try not to engage with them, basically. You won't be able to convince them that you're doing well. Everybody's just gonna get salty. So, next up, is it possible to successfully duel Reaper? And there was no further context applied in this post, like no specific heroes given or anything like that. Just like, can you beat Reaper in a 1v1? And there's a couple ways you do it. If you are a tank, you can't do it, really. Just flat out, it's not really feasible. Roadhog can, but if you fuck it up, you don't kill him. So if you're playing Roadhog, you've got to, like, right-click, hook, left-click, melee, and pray to God that killed him, or at least dropped him low enough that he's going to run away from you now. Because if you don't kill him off that volley, he is now going to heal up back up to full health off fighting you, because you're playing a tank, and you're a nice big juicy target for shotguns. So that's your only hope. The other tanks, they cannot really fight Reaper. Orissa's pretty much your best one overall, because you can barrier dance, and once he starts shooting you, if you use Fortify, that blocks enough damage that you're better than, like, Reinhardt at that point. Just because of Fortify's damage reduction overall. But you have a very big head hitbox, which is also scary when you're fighting Reaper. But those are, like, your best options for the tanks. For the DPS, it depends on, like, what you're playing, right? Like, if you're playing a hero like McCree, then it is no big deal, you just flashbang him. The problem there is that, like, the Reaper is going to be trying to use Wraith form to dodge your flashbang, which will basically just come down to him reading you, and if he fucks it up, he dies. And if you read him correctly, he dies. Because you just flashbang, fan the hammer, or flashbang 2 headshots, he's dead, right? But that's like it, you gotta flashbang him. If you don't, like, you're probably going to die to him. Because at that point, he knows that you can't stun him, and McCree is like, he's a pretty stocky model. Like, he's pretty easy to hit with shotguns, so you're pretty fucked at that point. Someone like, if you're playing a hero, like, if you're McCree also, you can outrange Reaper, and this is something a few heroes can do. You can just outrange Reaper. Reaper has a very limited field of, or a limited zone of threat. So if you're playing a hero like McCree, Soldier, even Tracer, right, like Hanzo, Mei, you can outrange Reaper if you just stay away from him and don't let him get close to you. then he will never be in a position to kill you, because he needs to be on top of you to actually kill you. So you can just outrange him instead, which is a much easier way of dealing with him. The thing is, you just need to, that point, be paying, like, really close attention to where he is. Because if you ever lose track of Reaper and he, like, gets the drop on you, well, now you're suddenly much more likely to die. But as long as you know where he is and you respect his zone of threat and stay out of range, he can't kill you. Like, he does have to get to you to actually have any chance to begin with. The thing is with a lot of heroes is it's not really very easy to kill Reaper because he has Wraith Form, so it's very easy for him to just disengage if you don't have hard crowd control. And even if you do have hard crowd control, like if you're Mei, your crowd control takes a while to take, right? Like, you have to build up the freeze on him first. So Reaper can just be like, I'm about to get frozen, and then use Wraith Form, and either run away from you, or decide that he can outduel you at this point because he got a couple shots in already. Wraith Forming resets his freeze build-up, so now he can just keep fighting you again. So, like, Mei isn't really that feasible to crowd control him, just because of the build-up it takes, unless you know his Wraith Form is down. So at that point, like with Mei, you're better off trying to outrange him and finish him off with the right-click instead, than maybe chasing after him after you've already dropped him kind of low. Because once he starts trying to run away from him, you can wall him off and hopefully finish him off at that point. But, you know, those are your real options with Reaper, is it's like crowd control him, have teammates, or outrange him. And what, you know, your teammates, that'll be really hit or miss. And as for outranging him or crowd controlling him, you know, there aren't many, like, DPS in the game that have got hard crowd control. If you're playing Sombra, you can do it as well, because you can hack him and then he can't use Wraith Form anymore, and you can outrange him at the same time, so Sombra's kind of got it all going for her. Yeah, but those are your options, really, and it'll depend on which DPS you're playing as to which one is better. Supports, you can't do it, dude. You can't do it. Your best bet is just surviving the Reaper, pretty much, and I mean, you know, if you're playing like Ana, you're just trying to trank him. Reaper's like a pretty big guy. It's not that hard to hit him, especially if he's like one of those Reapers that's going to Wraith Form up to you. Splash him with the grenades, and he can't heal anymore off of his lifesteal. So that's really big, just getting the anti-heal on him. That in and of itself might be enough to dissuade Reaper from chasing after you. Batista's got the lamp, which is going to offer a pretty beefy amount of protection from Reaper, because he has to now break the lamp before he can start killing you. So that's nice. Zenyatta, you're fucked. Your choices are click on his head really good, or have teammates there to help you, and that's it. Those are your options in terms of defending against Reaper. Mercy, you just avoid him. You're not trying to duel him even remotely. And Bridget, you can fight him as Bridget. You just have to be really patient and do a lot of, like, regenerating behind your shield. This is the case with, like, Bridget fighting a few heroes, is she can duel a lot of people, at least presently. We'll see after the change. The thing is that, like, basically when you take some damage from them, you just have to hold your shield up and space it out a little bit more, wait for your health to regenerate a little bit off your Inspire, and then resume fighting them at that point, while still using your shield to block as much damage as you can, going for, like, swing, block, right? And then using your cooldowns as much as you can in there. It's like, Bridget can fight Reaper, and it's actually not that hard. You just need to be really patient while you're fighting him and not get too excited, because his lifesteal can always take you by surprise. It always is, like, more than you think it's gonna be. So you have to be careful in regards to that. Yeah, but those are, like, your options in terms of dueling Reaper. It's definitely doable. It's just, a lot of it is, like, dependent on either reading Reaper or just respecting Reaper, right? You know, which are both difficult for different reasons and for different people, right? And the easiest way to duel Reaper is just not do it and just have teammates there to help you. Reaper hates nothing more than when the enemy team uses teamwork. But teamwork is often hard to find in Overwatch, especially in the lower ranks. So, there you go. But that's how you duel Reaper. It is definitely possible, it's just hard, and depending on the hero you're playing, maybe impossible.
So, oh, nope, that's wrong. That's wrong. I was clicking out of the window, as you might have been able to tell. So, next up is, how do pros never die from diva bombs? So, there's, like, two things to it. They both, like, tie into each other, as you might imagine, but there's two steps to it. First off, the pro players, they're generally better at positioning, right? Not of controversy. They generally know where they're meant to be standing. And they're usually thinking about cover when they're positioning as well, right? Because you also never, like, want to rely purely on your tank's shield. You still want to have things you can use in the environment as for cover, just in case, right? And the other part is, they are good at tracking ultimates, so they know when D.Va has her ultimate, so they're thinking about it and they're positioning accordingly ahead of time. Because the way you die to D.Va's bomb is that you're not thinking about D.Va's bomb, and you're just kind of stood out in open space. So then the first you're thinking about D.Va's bomb is, it starts flying towards you. At which point you look around the map and you pray to God that there's something within arm's reach that you can use as cover or die. But the pro players never get to the stage where they're having to rely on finding cover. They already knew she had her ultimate, and they were already thinking about how they can play around that in the near future. On top of already playing around cover, just to begin with on a baseline, because that's just a generally good thing to do positioning-wise, right? And then, when they know D.Va's got her ultimate, they're thinking a step ahead. They're thinking, well, if D.Va's got her ultimate right now, she's gonna be wanting to use it, so I need to make sure that I've got something near me that I can use to protect me from this danger in the near future. So, you know, it's not that hard to replicate. You just need to be thinking about things a few steps ahead. And just generally good things to do in terms of positioning is always be thinking about what you can use as cover. Because there are lots of ultimates that work this way where you get punished for just being out in open space and not thinking about cover ahead of time, right? Like Deadeye punishes you for this, Blizzard punishes you for this, right? Like there's a few Tac Visor punishes you for this. If you're always playing around cover, these ultimates are just less threatening to you because you're always near something that you can be using. So it's never that much of an issue. So it's not that hard of a thing to adapt to. You just need to be more conscious of both the enemy team and where you're standing. But you don't need to worry about the ult tracking aspect of it so much, because if you think about just the positioning aspect of it, that's gonna be enough 9 times out of 10. Because you'll always be near something you can use to block the bomb regardless. So there you go. That's the answer to that one. And the next question, and this is actually the last question for this week, a little bit of a shorter one. There weren't that many, like, questions that I felt I had that much to say about this time, because there were quite a few this week that were like, how do I climb out of bronze as a support? How do I climb out of silver? How do I survive against Doomfist in silver? Like, you know, it's like... And, like, when I've already picked out the Reaper one, it would be, like, really similar for the Doomfist one, right? Like, I'd be answering more or less the same thing twice. They both rely on similar ways of killing people. But anyway, the next question, and the last question is, when 222 comes out, should I be able to flex onto any of the tanks? But, you know, we can easily expand this out to any insert role here, right? So with the role select coming out, I do think you now are very strongly encouraged to be better at all of the heroes in your role. Now, I do think it is still not realistic to expect you to be good at every hero in that role. Because a lot of heroes in the roles just have, like, dramatically different playstyles, and there are always going to be some that you just don't jive with, right? Like, I am confident playing most tanks in the game, but I am not confident playing Zarya or Hammond, so I try to avoid playing them as much as possible. And that's fine, because I can play heroes still that cover those areas. Because if I can't play Hammond, I can still play Winston and D.Va, and that's covering the same area that Hammond covers. If I can't play Zarya, I can play D.Va and Roadhog, and they are covering the same area that Zarya is covering. They don't bring the same things to a team comp, so that'll sometimes be an issue, but, like, I can cover the same slot, right? So it's not the end of the world if you can't play every hero in a role, and I don't think it's to be expected. It's definitely not expected of the DPS role. There's too many DPSs with too many wildly divergent playstyles, right? It is not realistic to expect somebody to be good at Junkrat, McCree, Widow, Ashe, Hanzo, Mei, Torbjorn, Symmetra. Like, it's not feasible to ask somebody to be good at all of these heroes, right? But it is realistic now to expect a person to be able to play more things in their role. Because I always thought you could get by just being able to play, like, 2 things out of each role, pretty much. A main tank and a main healer, and an off-tank and an off-healer. And then, like, your pick of DPS, but ideally, like, a consistent and a burst DPS, pretty much. Or a DPS, or like a utility DPS and just a high-damage DPS might be a better way of putting it. But now, like, you should, because now it's easier to specialize in a role now, right? And it is much more encouraged for you to specialize in a role. So now, I don't think you should be able to play all of them, but you should be able to play probably half of them. But if we're talking about DPS, probably closer to a third of them, I think. Trying to cover as many of your bases as possible still, like, still trying to have, like, off-tanks and main tanks. Like, don't just pick, like, purely main tanks, right? Pick an off-tank as well. Pick an off-healer as well. So, like, spread it out a little bit, but I do think, like, half the role, or a third of the role for the DPS is probably, like, a pretty good baseline. Because at that point, you're covering a pretty wide range of heroes. You don't need to be able to pick into, like, every little situation that you can be in, just, like, most of them. Because, like, you know, there are situations where, like, Hammond is going to be better than Winston. But, by and large, there is a lot of overlap between those 2 heroes. So it's not that big of a deal if you can't play both of them, you know. So no, I don't think you should be able to play all of the tanks, just, you know, a few of them, pretty much. And same with the healers, same with the DPS. Especially the DPS. It's wholly not reasonable to... If anybody says to you that you should be able to play every DPS, that person is flatly insane, stupid, or both. So, there you go. Pretty simple answer answer but it was a fairly simple week overall. Now, I have made the mistake of, like, starting this video on this game. I thought that question would take longer to answer, but no, that was, like, kind of all I had to say on the matter, really. It was more straightforward than I thought it would be. So anyway, I've been playing Dragon Ball FighterZ again. I've been playing less of my MMO, because the expansion came out. I've kind of done most of the stuff I wanted to do at this point, so I'm, like, just kind of having that ticking over at this point. And, they're about to release the next set of characters, and one of them is one I've been waiting for a long time. They're gonna release them on August 8th. And it is August 4th at time of speaking. So very soon. It's Janemba and Gogeta Blue from the new Broly movie. And I've been waiting for Gogeta since the start of, like, Season 2 for the character releases. So, like, 6-7 months at this point. I'm pretty stoked. Vegeto's already my favorite character in the game right now. And Gogeta is the exact same thing. Vegeta is a fusion of Goku and Vegeta. Gogeta is a different fusion of Vegeta and Goku. Which might seem ridiculous, but there are 2 different fusion methods in the lore, so they get different results. Vegeta is using the earrings, whereas Gogeta is doing the dance that I'm sure you've seen. And much to-do has been made of it. Oh, yet another Goku is being released. How exciting. Which is always a little ridiculous to me for Dragon Ball FighterZ, because I always just think about, like, the Street Fighter series, and I think, you know, there are a lot of characters in that game that are basically Ryu, because Ryu is a Shoto fighter. That's his fighting style. And there are a lot of Shoto fighters. So there are a lot of Ryus in that game. Ken is a Shoto. Akuma is a Shoto. Evil Ryu is a Shoto. We've got Oni now. We've got Goku 10? Ryu's teacher. You know, we've got a fair few Shotos and a few riffs on them. Like, not quite Shotos, but close to. But, you know, people in Street Fighter don't really make a big deal about all these Ryu clones, because they're all different characters, right? Like, none of them are exactly the same. Like, Ryu is really straightforward. Ken is much more flashy, much more rushdown in style than Ryu is. Akuma is a glass cannon, you know? I don't really know enough about Oni to really say specifically, but, you know, they've all got, like, Ryu is a more aggressive form of Ryu. Evil Ryu is a more aggressive form of Ryu. And, like, all of the Gokus are different Gokus. All of the Vegetas are different Vegetas. Super Saiyan Vegeta is really standard, basic character. He's very Ryu-esque. Whereas base form Vegeta is very aggressive. Blue Vegeta is awful. Regular Goku is an all-rounder, as you might expect, him being the Ryu of the game. Base Goku is it's difficult to describe base Goku. He's very weird, you know? Anyway, the moral of the story is Dragon Ball Fighters fans are weird because they go, all these Gokus, when they're all completely different characters in gameplay. Yeah, they're all Goku, but none of them play the same, so I don't really get it. And I always just think of Street Fighter, and I'm like, it's really funny to me. It's really funny to think about in comparison to the two games. Anyway, so that was the conclusion of this Overwatch video. Yes, good. So thank you very much for watching if you did. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. I'm more than happy to answer. If you haven't already, you can join our Discord and ask questions more directly and have a conversation about them, or just shitpost with us. I started streaming on Twitch Thursday, Friday, Saturday, 8 p.m. EST till midnight EST. I changed the schedule. Haha, caught myself. There's a link to the channel in the description below. And if you managed to make it all the way through the video and somehow still enjoyed it, please like the video and subscribe for more content of middling quality in the future. And I hope you found the video helpful.